County Wetland meeting will come to order, and we'd like to welcome all present and anyone wishing to speak to any of the applications, please indicate so. The first on our agenda is a tabled application from last month. Jim Reynolds, is someone here to represent him?
Yeah, excuse me. Roger McKinley, 691 Mill Point Drive in Eastville. We had asked
Wait,
sorry,
excuse me, I'm going to read the ad that was posted for the October meeting. Jim Reynolds, care of Roger McKinley, requests permission to construct 133 linear feet of riprap revetment with no bank grading along the shoreline of Myers Creek located off Virginia State Highway 609, Level Green Road on Thorpe Road, tax map number 26-32B, VMRC number 21-1576. Go ahead.
We had an inspection of that piece of property, and at that time, it seemed like we needed to make a modification to that application. So we were trying to set up an on-site with the homeowner, myself, the contractor, and with Brian and, am I not on? There we go. So we were not able to accomplish that for various reasons. So at this point, I think what I need to do, if it's possible, is ask to table it for another 30 days, if that's okay. I don't know how we're doing on timing with the 60-day rule, but I need to have an on-site, and we just haven't been able to.
So you're wishing to table it?
Yes, ma'am.
If it's
Well,
requested.
why don't we say until the next meeting?
That's fine.
Table until the next meeting.
Because I know you're limited to how many meetings you can have in a year's time. Do you know if you're having a meeting in January?
It'll be February.
February,
Yeah.
okay.
It's not been, there's no statutory limitation or budgetary, whatever. It's just been mostly staff availability this year with a
Right.
lot of turnover. Just trying to kind of schedule our workload that,
I was trying to clarify that since there was no meeting coming up in January, that
Right,
30
yeah.
days would be thrown out the
That's why I'm
window.
trying to
So
get to
if
where
you
I'll
said
go ahead and
until
let
the
you guys
next
know.
meeting,
right.
that would be in February.
That's very fine.
Yeah, and I'll do a better job of getting up with you
Thank
and we'll,
I know you've been tied up with solar farms and everything else, but anyway, well, there's no rush on that. I mean, there's
okay.
timing that the contractor has to work around, and so he's probably looking at spring anyway, so.
Would you like a motion on that, Edna?
Yes, please.
I'd like to make a motion to entertain the request from Mr. McKinley to table this item until the next meeting.
Second, please.
I'll second.
It's been moved and second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now then, let's get rid of this. Okay. Next on the application is Keith Roach. Someone here to represent him, please?
That would be me.
Okay, let me read the ad, state your name for the record.
Roger McKinley, 691 Mill Point Drive, Eastville, Virginia.
Keith N. Roach and care of Roger McKinley is requesting permission to construct an 80 linear foot riprap revetment along the shoreline of Greenvale Creek, located off Virginia State Highway 354, River Road on Greenvale Road, tax map number 20G-3-1, VMRC number 21-1800. Go ahead.
Yes, well, we were out on the site on Tuesday, and everybody got a chance to look at it. The project itself is landward of mean high tide. There are some wetlands vegetation that won't be impacted, but are still present at the upstream side of the project. What's going to happen is the applicant is proposing to grade this bank back to a manageable slope. It'll be vegetated. He's got to allow some type of indent there to have access to the proposed pier that he's proposing to put in. So we considered a living shoreline there since it's wide open, but there are no real impacts to what we're proposing. And even if we are able to grade the bank to a manageable slope, we're concerned about the lower 3 to 4 feet of that bank that's just barely above mean high tide. So we felt that a revetment at the base of the bank, of the new bank, would be appropriate here instead of, or in lieu of, a living shoreline. It's basically in the RPA, but it's out of Wetlands Board jurisdiction, except for that little bit of wetlands that's up there at the upstream side. So trying to get rid of the defects that are in the bank. There's one fallen tree and some other things that need to be addressed with the undercutting. So we have plenty of space there. Everything's been removed from the lot, so we don't have any impacts to trees or anything like that. So that's what we're asking for. It's 3 feet high, or 4 feet high, I can't remember. Let me just check. Yeah, 4 feet high. On a newly created slope that takes care of all the defects and undercutting in the existing bank.
Does anyone on the board have any concerns? Anybody?
I have a couple questions
Okay,
of Roger. Roger, there's considerable boat traffic on this creek, and
Yes, sir.
And really, while the site conditions may lend themselves water depth-wise to a living shoreline, and this kind of pokes out there, this property, I can't see where a living shoreline would succeed with the amount of traffic. The other question, I'll let you react after a couple comments
Sure.
here, but with that amount of traffic in that marina that's now handling some pretty large boats, do you feel that 1.5 to 1 side slope on the riprap revetment is sufficient?
I think so. I mean, we've got plenty of latitude there. He'll probably grade the bank back to more like a 4 to 1 slope. And if you feel that we need to increase, the slope on the rock, we can do that. I mean, it's not an issue. We have plenty of space and room to do that. But yeah, there is a lot of traffic there, plus commercial traffic. There's not much right now, but in the spring, there will be. So we were concerned that a living shoreline just would not protect the newly created bank that we're getting ready to put in there, so. But I agree with you, yes.
A question to Mr. Barnes. Mr. Barnes, there's some discussion here on grading of the bank. Has there been a RPA plan submitted and approved by the county?
No, there's no landscape plan agreement on it for the buffer.
And then lastly, Mr. Woodward, on page 8, the statement regarding living shoreline, that includes words like cleaned up, manageable slope, not considered appropriate. Do you find that sufficient documentation to rule out a living shoreline?
Whether or not the site is appropriate for a living shoreline falls on to VIMS ultimately for the best available science, so I prefer not to answer that.
You think this application meets Code of Virginia?
Here we go again. These are the kinds of things, and if we're.
It's just a yes or no, Jay. I understand what your
No,
position is,
I don't
but,
want to be put in a position.
but
that
you're.
I state for you at the Wetlands Board whether or not this application meets the code. That's your decision.
a
I
real.
don't want to, we have appeal authority, and if someone were to appeal this to the commission, and it ends up in front of the commission, and it's stated that Jay Woodward said that this meets the code, I'm not in that, I don't want to be in that position.
Well, you are our only representative of the commission, correct?
I represent the agency, and I'm here to review and observe the deliberations of this board.
And the commission has the authority to veto any decision of this
The
board,
commission can review any wetland board decision it feels is inappropriate.
and they can overturn.
Yes, they can.
Or remand.
Well, in reading the latest guidelines on living shorelines, I can't see where this board can approve this prior to a decision by the county on the resource protection area. That's clearly stated in the new living shoreline guidelines issued by the commission. Am I incorrect, Brian?
Is there grading proposed?
Yeah.
4-1, Roger just said 4-1, got the
Well-
slope back.
It seemed to me that that was discussed as a result of your question about the suitability of the plan as proposed. So we're going to get into a catch-22.
Well, it says it right here in the application, Jay.
Okay,
Grade the slope.
okay.
If it's landward of mean high water, is it really in your jurisdiction at all?
No, but in the guidelines, Roger, I presume you've read the new guidelines. It says that we cannot act until the decision by the county is made on the area of the RPA.
And doesn't that normally fall on the contractor when he gets a land disturbance permit?
It's whoever wants to, the landowner could do it, but this board says we cannot act until that's approved by the county.
It did previously for a long time, but with the new guidelines and the new code changes, and certainly new guidance on that, that's tacking a bit, and tacking is always difficult. When I was reviewing this, it did occur to me that it needs about 16 units for planting, so that'd be 16 100 square foot units, 10-foot by 10-foot units for replanting. The other thing that you guys may want to discuss real quick is on your section view drawing, it does say existing grade.
Well,
The bank grading is not depicted on the drawings in the application.
Well, I'm reading from Virginia Code, Chapter 13, Title 28.2, which became effective on July 1st, 2020. It says, unless the local government has determined compliance with the Bay Act, we cannot act.
I would also bring up, both on page 7 of the application, indicating 0 feet channelward of mean high water, square footage of encroachment, 0. The application plan and section view both show it to be not only above high water, but in that one section where there is vegetation, behind the vegetation. So the question does arise as to whether or not this requires a wetland permit. And I bring that up because past chief of the division, on more than one occasion, when we had projects, the idea was the RPA is the resource protection area buffer. The resource itself is the intertidal zone, and if you're going to move it, avoid the impacts to the resource by moving them back into the buffer, then you've avoided those impacts. If there are no impacts, if it's above mean high water, we're going on what the application is. You have to go by what the drawings show. And I'm assuming it was staked. I saw it, I don't know, however many months ago. I saw it September probably. I don't know that this application needs a wetland permit.
Well, that was my intention from the very beginning, but I never could get that decision from the person in charge.
Well, I'm going to follow the Code of Virginia and the guidelines that were issued on July 1st. I'm really not interested in a retired employee of VMRC's opinions. I will state that the shoreline has been so decimated that there's virtually no habitat or vegetation. It's already been chopped down. So I don't know, I doubt if we're protecting much. So I'm not opposed to this. I just see the General Assembly decided to link these two statutes. And that puts us in a very difficult position, according to code, as to how we can act when there's bank grading going to take place and the code says one thing. And it's above our jurisdiction. I realize that.
And I'll just say so it's clear to everyone, to the Commonwealth, to the board, and to any agents listening, any project that is not a living shoreline, I will not be making the no permit required determination. I've told many agents that personally ever since this code change took effect last year. If you were going to propose, and especially now, there's a creep. I've had one every single day this week, somebody wanting to get a riprap, slide it landward, and avoid this board. I'm not going to be the one making that decision. And if you want to determine after you've seen the site Monday and during an extremely low tide, if you determine that it's not in your jurisdiction, that it's in the Bay Act's jurisdiction, that will not be able to be approved the way it's depicted here. I had one earlier this week that's like that. I make them completely re-vegetate, even if the buffer wasn't vegetated before, we go strictly by the book, where it will be restored to a woody vegetative buffer. Very few people that move here want to do that. So I think it's better that they continue to push more in a living shoreline direction. Because the Living Shorelines Initiative will be dead on arrival if all these projects just move a foot landward, decimate the buffer, and we go on. It'll be business as usual. That was not the intent of the General Assembly and the governor, and that's not the intent of really the whole eastern seaboard of the United States, is moving more in a direction of shorelines that can withstand sea level rise better than a solid wall of rock. Incorrect?
Yeah, we're not decimating the buffer. We are regrading. It'll be much better than it is now. And resource protection means to protect the water, and by regrading and establishing a revetment which prevents erosion into the water, it looks like to me that that's protecting the resource. It's not decimating the RPA. It's doing it in a constructive manner that has been working for the last 50 years. And there's plenty of proof to that. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
We're not decimating the buffer. We're improving it to the extent that it does what it's supposed to do. It's to protect the resource. And that's what we're doing. If you don't do anything, it's going to continue to erode into the creek. If you don't do anything.
If you grade back an area that has shrubs and grasses and trees growing on it,
There's no trees.
and you return it to nothing but lawn grass that's mown weekly and rocks, that is decimating it, because there's no biology there and there's no habitat there, and it's not, even a plain reading of the Bay Act, it's not consistent with the Bay Act. It's just not.
Riprap is a habitat. It's already been proven. It's a habitat for something.
I think your argument is that it's not in the habitat, though.
It's in the RPA. That's habitat.
I disagree. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I mean, if you're not the one to make a decision that a project is either in the Wetlands Board jurisdiction or not, who makes that decision?
I actually already answered that question, and I'll repeat it so you hear it again. If you propose a breakwater system, a rock sill system, a system that uses anything that's consistent with these two guidelines, Group 1 and Group 2, even if it's on the periphery of those things, I will make that determination, correct? If you are proposing something that does not in any way, shape, or form meet those two groups, I send it to the Wetlands Board to make that determination. That's why we're having this hearing now. They're going to do two things. They're going to determine that it's a complete application. I think that's what they're discussing right now. And if it is, then they'll act on that application. If it's not, they can table it, they can send it back to you, or they could just deny it, saying that it's not something they can act on. So if you're proposing a riprap revetment or a bulkhead or anything that is not a Group 1 or Group 2, this board will determine whether it's a no permit required or not. Unless the bulkhead is just totally out in subaqueous bottom, I will do that as well. But if it's a living shoreline, that'll be handled by me. That's the purpose of the process. There's no permit fees with that. That is to incentivize in several different ways people using a living shoreline technique.
It's up to the board. Now, as far as the requirements for planting, we don't have any problem with that. That can be handled after we move along from this position. But I think we need to make a decision this morning that if that's what's needed, a land disturbance permit or a WQIA or whatever he needs, we can take care of that. I kind of leave it up to the contractor because he's the one that's doing the land disturbing and he has to apply for a land disturbance permit. But that can be handled if you can approve the project or whatever you decide to do. In knowing that we've got a requirement to do in order to make it valid, that would be perfectly fine.
Edna, it's clear in these new changes to the Code of Virginia that we cannot act until the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act decisions have been made, not after the fact. It requires that decision by the county to be made. Therefore, if you're ready for a motion, I can give you one.
Okay, how about the rest of the members? Do they have anything they'd like to add? Cecil? No. And, well, Brian, want me to go on?
No further comment.
How about you, Jay?
I would just make sure that you open the meeting for public comment to make sure it's,
I was getting ready to do that before I asked for his motion. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to say anything? Okay, I'll entertain a motion, please.
Well, in keeping with the Code of Virginia, Chapter 13, Title 28.2, I move to table this application until such time a determination is made by the county regarding compliance with Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act.
Is there a second to that?
I'll second.
Moved and second, all in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Okay, it's 5-0. Okay, thank you so much. The next on the agenda is Leland and Marion James. You've just done Roach. Next on the agenda is Leland and Marion James.
That is mine also. Roger McKinley, 691 Oak Point Drive, Eastville, Virginia.
I'd like to read the ad, please. Leland P. and Marion James and care of Roger McKinley is requesting permission to construct 180 linear foot riprap sill and 134 and 196 linear foot riprap revetment along the shoreline of the eastern branch of Carter's Creek, located off Virginia State Highway 635 Steamboat Road on the land, tax map number 34-20B, BMRC number 21-2135. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm thinking that you all have the revised addition to the plan view, which now stipulates a proposed rock sill, actually two, totaling 176 feet, 196 and 180 feet. There is a small revetment to the upstream side of the pier that's 34 feet. That's above mean high water. And so that's the revision. Hopefully you all have a copy. Same distance on that one section. It's just changed from a revetment to a rock sill. Did you get a copy of that?
Roach was table laws.
With the revision? Okay, great, thank you. Yep. That's over here. Yeah, we took out the revetment, and that's a sill.
I'm waiting.
We were on this property to do an inspection on Tuesday. Had a really good low tide, so we were able to get a really good look at everything that's being proposed. And we've got one little section there in the middle that is a small pocket marsh that goes up into the upland some. We skipped over that, but we started at either end of that. On the downstream shore, there is an existing riprap revetment already there. And on the upstream side, there's an existing riprap revetment there also.
Anyone on, want us to continue? Anyone on the board, like to add anything to this?
Look,
Anybody?
I guess some comments or a reaction from.
I'm gonna check with Jay and
Yeah,
Brian.
my question's, indefinitely, this project is needed. It's active erosion we're seeing on this branch of Carter Creek due to all the boat traffic that's now been thrown over because of the no wake sign on the main stem. All the traffic's come to the eastern branch.
Yeah.
So lots of active erosion here, and the project's definitely needed. I do appreciate your, Roger, your revision.
Thank you.
But, the only concern I have is this sheet you've got in here on typical rock sill. And in the future, I don't want to see typical. I want
Got
to,
the dimensions of the project on there.
yeah, words like usually and may and can and are supposed to be site-specific to this project. So in the future, I want to see, you've got the dimensions, 176 feet, width 8, height of 3. So that, to me, the application, I'm not sure why any typical needs to be in. Typical could be anywhere in the United States, so I just make that comment. Jay, do you have any comments regarding typical drawings?
I've raised this issue with Roger previously, especially in light of the Living Shoreline 2 criteria that clearly states the structure can only be no higher than 1 foot above mean high water. He has the height of the sill, but he doesn't really have it relative to high and low water. So a 3-foot high sill and 4 feet of water doesn't even break the surface. A 3-foot high sill, so I've raised that issue with Roger before, and that's why we have these dimensions on here. I would still like to see in the future, relative to high water, if it's not a scale drawing, what
Okay.
that is. Again, you can make assumptions and a typical and so forth. Sand fill, what I would say in this project, while it is a sill offshore with sand fill behind it, there are no plants proposed, ergo, it does not meet the definition of living shoreline per code. While the intent is there to protect the existing vegetation, I don't have a problem with the design or what it is, but this is, you know, just like you can go back to code. What is a living shoreline? We can read it in code. And plants. Well, that has always meant to me that there's going to be planting, not just protecting the existing plants. So it's a living shore, it's a sill project that looks reasonable. Whether or not one could take that to call this a living shoreline per definition, I'm not getting that answer from up above. So it does require a permit from VMRC because it's landward of, it's channelward of low water. There is a portion of the project which is riprap, which is clearly not living shoreline, but that riprap is above mean high water, ergo above the board's jurisdiction, one could argue. So those are my comments.
Hey, Jay, just as a general comment or question to you, when living shorelines move out on state bottom, has there been any discussion about requiring royalty tax on those areas that are taken out of public use?
We have typically never required a royalty for stone structures, whether they be breakwaters or riprap wedges against bulkheads, because the understanding is that's not a fill, that's an impact. It's not a loss, it's an impact. It's not a taking it out of, it does not change the ownership. You know, the rock will be owned by the property owner. The land under the rock remains the property of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and it does provide habitat for encrusting organisms, interstitial spaces. So no, we do not generally charge a royalty for stone channelward of low water.
So let me ask a question both to Brian and Jay. If Roger, for this board to approve this, if Roger were to add to his plan the elevations of the top of the rock sill, the slopes of the rock sill, and the plantings in the sand fill, would you entertain that in a motion? Would you be comfortable with that if those amendments were made to the sill and the plantings? And I guess I agree with Jay, a living shoreline has to have living components. Rock and sand aren't living. Certainly it will protect this resource, it'll protect the property. I think it's beneficial to the public and the landowner, but with those items added, elevation, slope, and plants, Brian, would you be comfortable with a motion that would include those things to be prior to issuance of the permit?
Yeah, I'm comfortable. You're seeing a lot of folks incorporating what I would call living, and this is that project, it's incorporating some living shorelines techniques. But the biology is missing, the planting is missing. So that's certainly a condition you could consider. My only comment about this project was gonna say, I know I was not a huge fan of Roger's last project, but this one is pretty consistent with the guidelines, even without the plantings. So, yeah, I don't.
Could I
have
make a
any objection
comment?
with this project.
This board, as I understand it, and I've been on it for quite a while, is not in the business of engineering these projects. And I'd like to see this project approved as submitted.
if there is stipulations, if it's in the stipulations, we could still approve it, but they could be added, correct? Like, if Brian needs something in reference to whatever, the county, what Roger said about the height and whatever, if something like that is missing, we could still approve it, and they could, that stipulation could be added to the motion, correct?
I'm perfectly willing to make those changes, and it's just a matter of changing and putting dimensions on the drawing, and we can add planting. I'm sure that Mr. James would be happy with that.
Ron, what's your feelings on this?
That's up to you guys. You know, I agree with what Cecil said. You don't want to get in the habit of engineering a project. I think when you start dictating height and lengths and things like that, then you're starting to engineer the project. I think requiring plantings, you might be able to get away with that, and that's not, because that's pretty consistent with what you might see in other places. If they do not plant this area, it won't be the end of the world. I would be willing to bet somebody lunch that within 2 or 3 years it will be vegetated anyway. But that's certainly up to you guys. Like I say, this is not, nobody should feel bad about struggling with these issues, because the Wetlands Act has been around a long time, 1973, 74, and things are changing rapidly now in a different direction. It's not going to happen overnight. And dealing with these newer projects where and Roger innovatively here, he protects the areas that need to be protected. He leaves the pocket marsh open, and he's, I don't disagree at all with the way it's designed. I think if your last consideration now is over whether to require plantings as a condition or not, I think that's fairly minor compared to the project as a whole.
I just want to say, you know, I agree, Cecil, with you. It's not this, it's in the purview, not in the authority of this board to design things. I just see some things as omitted from the application, but I strongly support the project and would be glad to support your motion.
Is anyone in the audience that wishes to say anything to this? Anybody else on the board have any concerns? I'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to move to approve this project as submitted.
I'll second it.
Move, approve, and second to, as submitted. Is there a second? Oh, second.
He did second.
He did second. Okay, all in favor signify by raising your right hand. Okay, 5-0. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Is this one?
Okay, all right, thank you.
Carter Mill. Here we go. Get these things. Okay, the next on the agenda is Leland and, no, David Ludeman.
Daniel. Yeah.
David Ludeman, Graham Neal's the last two. Okay. State your name for the record, please.
Yes, Joseph Scott, P.O. Box 315, Kilmarnock, Virginia, 22482. I'm the agent for the applicant.
The ad requests David J. Ludeman and Kira Joseph Scott is requesting permission to construct a 65 linear foot of riprap revetment and replace 620 linear feet of timber bulkhead along the shoreline of Carter's Creek, located off Virginia State Highway 632, John Neck Road on Snowbird Lane, tax map number 33-197 and 198, VMRC number 21-2104. Go ahead.
Sorry I couldn't meet with you guys on site. It's funny you were talking about policy issues this morning. The local school system's policies kept me from being able to attend that meeting regarding COVID, so anyway. So yeah, this is a bulkhead replacement on Carter's Creek. The property here is similar, a few doors down. I came before the board a few months ago with a similar section of bulkhead that needed to be replaced. It's pretty tall bulkhead. It's pretty deep water in front of it. There's no way, at least in my opinion, that a living shoreline could be created without doing major changes to this piece of property, which had significant changes done to it in the 90s and before then. So just looking to replace the bulkhead that's there. And then there's a section on the return side where we're going to add a riprap revetment along a bank that is a pretty tall bank. It's already forested. There is vegetation growing along that adjacent property, and it pretty much stops right as this riprap would start. So just kind of closing that off. In terms of needing a living shoreline, the rest of that shoreline is pretty much vegetated and living and doing its job because it has appropriate natural slope and all of that sort of stuff. So rather than extending that bulkhead there, we're just going to put rock to tie that little section in to the existing bulkhead. And I guess if you have any questions that I may be able to answer, maybe.
Board's concerns?
Yeah, Joey, did you, on section, that's the area of the revetment, section, I guess that'd be 1 through 3. Did you consider, when we were out there, there's surface water coming down there, right there where the revetment meets the proposed bulkhead, existing bulkhead. Did you consider trying to expand that vegetated area by setting a sill creekward and sand fill behind that?
I think you could do that, and we had talked about doing that. The issue there is I do believe you would have to, because of the orientation of the property, I do believe you would have to do a lot more in terms of tree, possibly even removal on that bank in order to get the appropriate amount of sunlight. And I base that on the fact that the grass kind of stops there already naturally. And my experience of doing this, there's usually a couple of reasons why grass stops where you would think it would continue on. So it was a sort of situation where how much, as was addressed earlier this morning, how much RPA modification do we want to make for this thing to survive there? So I saw it as, and the state and the county may not agree, I just saw it as less of an impact to the overall picture of the resource protection area and the intertidal area versus going out and doing that and then having to make a more significant alteration of the RPA in order for the thing to work properly. And like I said, I'm basing that on site conditions because that grass stops right there. It's grown all nice and pretty where there's no trees covering it. So I was trying to avoid having to do a whole lot of grading and bank alteration. So that's what was our thought process when we looked at that anyway.
Yeah, that's pretty much facing easterly exposure.
Yes, and I think a lot of it just has to do with the overhanging. And my hopes, are, well, from experience, I would think that when they do some of the limbing up and put the rock against the bank, you may see some revegetation there, you may not. But the overarching issue is that would be something that occurs more naturally rather than trying to strip it and make the sunlight shine on it, so.
I agree. It'd be a tough site. You get a lot of boat wake
Well, that's,
hitting this area.
that's
down.
true, and that's, that's Carter's Creek, so. It's just, to me, and I could be speaking incorrectly here, but there's not a name for it. I just call it just a transitionary area. We have tons of them, and I can never, ever get any solid guidance from any scientific folks on what to do there. And it's where the tall or taller bank transitions into a more natural slope, and it always looks like this. And depending on who you ask which day of the week, would be the recommendation. So I'd just go with what I know and what I've tried to learn, and if it's not right, we'll just change it. And
This entire project's water barge implemented?
more than likely, yes. I think most of, there may be section that goes back into the Phragmites there, they may have to do from the upland. But I would imagine that that's probably, there's going to be some areas of upland where they may have to work along, but they should be able to work right along the shore area there at the top of it. Because I don't think he wants to destroy that lawn. Looks kind of expensive. Nice, a lot greener than mine, so.
Anyone else on the board? Brian, do you have something?
No concerns. We looked at the site, and several of us got down and walked the reach here where the 65-foot of riprap revetment would go. It's pretty heavily undercut. The profile view seems to indicate that that bank will be left alone, and the work will be done without any adverse impacts to the resource, so no issues there.
Anyone in the audience would like to say anything? Jay?
The portion going, the bulkhead channel or to low water will require a permit from VMRC, and we typically charge a royalty for private upland creation of $1 a square foot, I think. Kind of tagging along to your last question.
Where would that be, Jay?
I think it's about $1 a square foot for
No,
public.
I mean, which area?
Everywhere where the bulkhead, where the low water line reaches the bulkhead, so I should bring my readers. What is that,
There's a
9?
lot of it.
Number 9, all the way around the point.
So when things are straightened, then that's called, then that would be charged?
He's indicating they're going a foot channelward of the existing bulkhead. The existing bulkhead is the mean low water line, so they're creating a new mean low water line a foot out times however many linear feet will be the square footage that we charge the royalty, because that is a loss. That is considered upland creation. It's not a conversion, it's a loss. If you had gone with rock in front of it, even with an 8 or a 10-foot base width, we would have approved it, but we don't charge a royalty for rock.
Yeah, that's that section you've indicated, Joey, on your drawing, segment 7 through 9, where it zigs in and out, that portions of existing removed or straightened. Is that,
Oh, yeah, along there, where it's pushing out. They're gonna try to straighten that up as best they can in terms of keeping it as tight as possible, and there are sections of it that they may have to pull up in order to do that.
okay.
I mean, it's just steady. It's actually gotten worse since I originally looked at it. Of course, we haven't had a lot of rain recently, which is kind of a good thing at this point, so.
Thanks for the clarification.
Is there any further discussion? If not, I'll entertain a motion, please.
Move that the project be approved as it's presented.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you much. Okay, the next on the list is Graham H. Neal.
Yes, Joseph Scott, P.O. Box 315, Kilmarnock, Virginia 22482. I'm the agent for the applicant.
Okay, and Graham H. Neal Jr., care of Joseph Scott, is requesting permission to install a 110 linear foot geotube sill pumped with dredge spoil and utilize 100 cubic yards of dredge spoil to establish a wetland planting area. Land would have created sill area and plant 1,200 square feet of spartina and alterna floor along the shoreline of Church Prom off Carter Creek, located off Virginia State Highway 709, Gaskins Road, on Greentown Road, tax map number 27-196, BMRC number 21-2233. Go ahead.
Yes, so this is one of several dredge jobs I've been asked to do recently. But in this particular case, rather than haul off the spoils, they would like to try to repurpose them using the geobags and then putting some of the spoils into the areas. I'm sure you saw where I had the stakes there along the shoreline when you went on Tuesday. That is the back edge of the bags. So those areas that were cut in, the spoils would go in there, they would be planted, the bags would go in front of it. And the bags can actually be sprigged as well. Unfortunately, I guess the bags aren't considered, they're not within the LS 1 or 2, as there are a couple other things that have been created that aren't part of it either, just because of the language in the law. At least that's my understanding. I'm not an attorney. So the goal is to take some of that dredge spoil, put it in those bags, put some of it behind it in the spots that kind of need to be straightened up, and to go ahead and plant it. That's the goal. Obviously, when you start digging stuff like this, and we've already had to do this with the Corps, they have required certain grain sizes, so if it's below those grain sizes, it cannot be used. So if they get into it, there is a possibility that they might just have to haul most of it off. Hoping we're not going to have to do that. If we don't have to do that, I'd like to have a permit to go ahead and do what is originally planned, because that keeps them from having to take it all the way around the other side of the creek and offloading it. There's a lot of expense in that. So that's kind of where we stand now. It is a finer material, of course, up in that portion of the creek, but the contractor seems pretty confident that it should work with the bags that they have ordered, because they ordered these bags specifically for the size that they needed, rather than using the giant ones. And the contractor that's doing it did a similar job. I think it's the Carryoman boat ramp up in Westmoreland County. So they have done this before and have, experience doing this.
Who is it?
Docks of the Bay. And I think it was it's a boat ramp in Westmoreland, and I believe it's off, I think it's called Carryoman, not Carritoman, Carryoman. So, anyway. So I guess if you have any questions, this is kind of new to me, but it's the same as a rock sill, it's just a bag full of sand, so.
I think it's the first time that the board, at least since I've been on it, has had an opportunity to look at dredging. And I guess there are other entities in the state, and particularly Jay's operation. I'd like to hear his comments on the dredging operation.
Yeah, the dredging, the majority of the project is channelward of low water, channelward of the board's jurisdiction, but there is fill in the intertidal zone in a non-vegetated wetland, so it's not exempt like it would be sand on a beach. We have worked with VIMS for years. There's always, one of the concerns about dredging in these areas is the slumping. If you dredge too close to a marsh, that hole slumps in and you lose the marsh. So there's a 4 times the depth width buffer that he's meeting in this case. I'm interested to follow up on looking at that Carryoman Bay project, because that would have been handled by Jeff Madden. And we've seen this proposed before, where you use these geobags to contain the
Right.
fines. But I haven't seen it used a lot where you can, using it also as your retaining wall to hold additional fines, and whether or not that would be effective or not. But, yeah, we've seen people plant the bags. From a logistics standpoint, this will probably be cleaner than hauling it. And the more times you handle dredge material, the more chances for a mess. You go from, the creek to the barge to the truck to the offload site to wherever else. And everywhere along that route, you're losing material when it's really fines. So, we're reviewing it, and, so far, I haven't gotten a VIMS report on this, I don't think, other than, this is one of 3 that has been in at least the Carter Creek, one of which is gonna come to the commission because it's protested. But in each case, when I've asked VIMS, their focus, their concern is maintaining the buffer to the vegetated wetlands. Make sure your dredge cut stays far enough away that we don't need to worry about the slumping of that soft material into the hole, which will lose the wetlands and fill the hole you just dug.
So the depth of the dredging is based on the width of the, say, the creek?
Well, the depth of the dredging, the buffer to the vegetated wetlands is based on how much you're taking out. So if you're
Okay.
going from 2 feet to 4 feet, that's 2 feet of depth.
Mhm.
Total of 4 feet, but you've already got 2 feet, so you're removing 2 feet. We would say 4 times 2 is 8, you gotta stay 8 feet away from the edge of the marsh with that 2-foot cut. 3-foot cut, you'd have to stay, did I do my math right? 2 times 3 is 6?
Yeah.
Hold on. Yeah, so it's a 4-by buffer. It's, all I know
12
is a
feet,
4X buffer.
Yeah.
And X being the depth of material to be removed, not the total depth you're getting.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but we're reviewing it. Again, I can probably go online right now and see what VIMS has said about it, but they're concerned more with the slumping of the adjacent wetlands in these cases than they are with resuspension of material, sedimentation, effects on oysters. In this, do you have in a lot of these cases, they're proposing to put a
So-
turbidity curtain?
Yeah, that wasn't originally included, but it has been revised because the Corps required it, so.
Yeah, so they put a turbidity curtain so that the temporary impacts of disturbance of mucking up the water stays inside that area
Mhm.
as opposed to, going off on SAV or oysters downstream. There's no oyster leases here, there's no SAV here. But we do look into all of that.
Okay, thank you.
And it's plenty far off because it's really just kind of a channel slip dredge rather than coming right up to the,
Yeah.
because he's just going into those 2 existing slips.
These kinds of projects, I'm surprised we don't see them, they're expensive. We see these all the time in Virginia Beach. Not only is it a channel going way up, it's a spur going to each individual dock, and, there's 40 or 50 homeowners, the city sponsors it. We see these a lot in those types of areas.
So the option to that would take a 45-foot workboat and blow out a hole, right?
That's not something we would issue a permit for.
That's how it used to be done.
You don't need a permit for
The
that.
bed springs, no, you don't need a permit for it, but you might get a ticket for it
Yeah,
if
50
you're
foot,
doing
yeah,
it willfully and intentionally.
yeah.
And this was scaled back considerably because it was going to go much further out, but then cost became an issue, so.
Anyone else on the board, are we ready for that? I mean, Joey, do
Yeah.
you have anything that we
Yeah,
haven't?
If there's any other questions you guys might have,
Okay.
that I might be able to
Anyone?
answer.
Well, you
On
brought
the-
up the silk curtain. How would that be placed?
It's weighted. It's like a,
Where does it go?
it's like a silt fence out in the water, and it would go just beyond the edge of where they are coming in there. So I think on the revised drawing, which was sent to VMRC,
I
but
just didn't bring it with me.
that's fine, and it, how things are now with technology. Where is it? There it is.
I mean, does it
Just
go,
beyond, so right here.
does it go clear across the channel?
Yeah. I go all the way across this black line right there. Just go right across the creek.
Okay.
I mean, so it's kind of like, well, kind of like a silt fence when you're working.
It's
Trying to
more,
encapsulate
more
that
properly
area.
termed a turbidity curtain. And our permit conditions, when we do require a turbidity curtain, there is a statement in there while allowing reasonable navigable ingress and egress. In this case, it's probably not gonna be a lot of boating traffic, but, you know, we require these typically in these larger areas where you open it like a gate and you let people out, and you close it back down, you do your work, it doesn't stop everything, but it's like anything else, it's a mitigative measure to reduce the amount of transport of resuspended sediments.
Probably only a concern to the guy across the creek that can't get his boat out, or might not be able to get his boat out. This is really, I think, an innovative and an interesting approach, Joey. I think all the board members are interested in seeing this and ask that we be notified so we could observe this activity, because I think it's innovative and something that others will want to participate in. And we're only talking, I would point out too, we're only talking about 10 dump truck loads
Yes.
of material here.
It's more geared, I think, the contractors, and then I'll shut up after this, but the contractors, I think, are more geared, they get a lot of slip dredging questions, and usually it can't be done because of the spoils and where to put them. So they're hoping that maybe they can experiment with some stuff like this. Because like Jay said, it's done a lot in Virginia Beach where they can do this, and if the person needs a slip dredge and these bags can be placed in front of an existing marsh, it might actually address some of what Brian was talking about earlier with the sea level rise stuff, where you can actually kind of build that marsh up a little bit. But you gotta have, there has to be a first one, and then a second one, and all that jazz, so.
I totally agree with just what we've seen in the minor sea level rise now. The wetlands just around the corner at my house have receded at least by 75%. Grass is gone, it's rounding out.
Does anyone else have any concerns, Brian?
No, indeed. Like Mr. Scott said, it comes to you because it's not one of the actual structures or devices listed in Group 1 or Group 2. Maybe if this is successful, a few years from now, it would be, but we'll see.
Okay.
You have anything?
No, I'll just, because Cecil's comment, actually, you know, back in the day, when a lot of these creeks had working watermen going in and out every day, or not every day, but enough, you know, no, we don't call that prop dredging. That's just, the channel stays open, and every day a little bit, it just doesn't settle in there. Again, when you go in intentionally, and we had a project over on the eastern shore that we caught a guy, and he was backing his boat up because he was trying to develop the upland property, and we threw the book at him. I mean, it was thousands of
Yeah.
dollars of, you know, what were you doing? Well, you know, I got stuck.
Yeah,
Repeatedly,
right.
you know, he kept backing up and getting stuck over, I mean, he couldn't justify it. You know, people do it all the time. Well, I mean, it's intent, you know, the comings and goings, and if you've got to go out and check your pots, you might want to try to wait for a high tide. If you don't get a high tide, you know, in a couple of days, you got to go out anyway. So those types of projects, you know, the initial dredge cut is done, and then hopefully it just maintained over the years, and we're not talking a lot of material. And, you know, in this case, it's not to develop upland property. It was a mud flat that now you're trying to sell to a guy and say you got 3 feet of water. So this is a reasonable dredge project, in my opinion.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I'd like to go by and look at it.
Well, and I would, I don't argue because I'm not a lawyer, but I've made the point that the law says a living shoreline is rock, blah, blah, or other structural components. somebody somewhere felt the need to add that phrase, other structural components. Is a geobag a structural component? You know, is a tree that you've pulled in, you know, to now.
Oyster castles?
Or oyster castles, call them oyster castles, call them cinder blocks, call them ready reef. I mean, there's any number of innovative approaches to get to the intent of holding fine material long enough that it can support plant growth. I think this is another structural component, but I'm
Yeah.
not getting buy-in from the people that
Okay.
make those decisions.
Well, do I?
Public comment. You can open it
No further comment, I'll entertain a motion.
And no public comment?
I'll make a motion to approve
on the
as
record.
submitted.
I'll second.
All in favor, signify by raising your right. Thank you.
Don't want any hiccups.
Okay, thank you much.
Thanks.
Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Second.
Well, I know we're all in favor, so approved. And Cecil, Jay, do you have the original minutes to sign? They go to Cecil.
Yeah.
And no further ado.
Excuse me. Could we get, Brian, we were to get a report, a presentation from Seas on the state program, grant program this month. Did they not respond to you?
No, that's, I did not put that on my to-do list, I apologize. Let me make sure I make a note to pick up on that.
And then secondly, has there been any progress made on the two pending violations we've cited?
I still do not have a JPA from Craig, although that may have come in this week, I'll do a check on that.
On the Flamia?
On the one for your Maratico violation. As far as Windmill Point, I think, in January, we need to pick that up. I expect we will have a new person on staff, hopefully in January, in the environmental position, so, things are a little bit, not on hold, but moving slowly until then.
You indicated a couple months ago that most of that debris violation that occurred has been washed away.
Yes.
Is that something we need to take
It's
a look
even
at
worse.
again?
Yeah, it's even worse now, I mean, a lot of it's just completely gone.
Do we need to do a site visit whenever we meet next,
That would
again on that?
probably be a good idea, yeah.
That's, nothing else, Edna. Next meeting's February 10th, correct?
Yes.
And for what it's worth, I guess, not board business, but we finally issued the permit, the VMRC permit, speaking of Windmill Point, for the Westland Beach breakwaters and sand. So when you do, if you do go down there to look at the violation, you may want to talk about that a little bit. But, Brian, as far as I know, for the county, was the agent kind of for that project, and hopefully things down at Windmill Point will start improving for the public and on the private property at the marina as well.